Standing by is Edmund Zagorin. He's the founder of supply chain technology company Arkestro. Edmund, let's just get right to what a lot of people are wondering. What are the immediate implications of Trump's new 15% global tariff announcement? How will this impact the average American?
Yeah, Austin, it's a great question. And I think if you're looking at the coverage over the past 24 hours, you're getting two very different stories. One is coming out of the administration, primarily from Besant, and the message is nothing's changing. We lost the IEPA authority in the SCOTUS decision, and we're going to reimpose tariffs through other authorities to be as identical to what was taken away as possible. The other story you're getting is from the market, and the market is reacting to a shockwave from this announcement. And there are really two drivers from that. One is this has given every company a reason to rethink their costs and have a discussion with their suppliers and their customers about costs. And some percentage of those companies will take that opportunity, and that by itself will send shockwaves through the global economy. The second reason is rebates. And I know you've talked about this on the show, but rebates are a big deal. There are about 300,000 American businesses that are affected by this that could be waiting in line to reclaim some amount of the tariff they've paid since April 2nd of last year. It's 325 days since that April 2nd Liberation Day date. That's a lot of money. Over 100 billion. Some people are saying 134 billion. Some estimates are 170 billion. Whatever the number, that's a lot of money. And so then that's a question of if you've had suppliers that have come to you and said, hey, we need to raise price because of tariffs over the past 325 days, and then they're getting a refund, maybe there's a conversation about who that refund goes to and how it gets distributed. So that is going to be a big conversation we're going to see playing out.
Is there any clarity on how a business might be able to apply for a rebate? Is there any clarity on what mechanisms might be in place to get something like that rolling?
So after this, it's going to go back to the lower courts, and the lower courts are going to have to work through a ruling on it. Trump and Besant seem to think that that could take quite a while. However, there is a precedent for this. In 1998, there was a similar ruling around trade authority. In fact, the government over $700 million back to businesses who had paid tariffs. The process took around 2 years, but there is precedent for this happening in the past. And so because of that, you see, and the numbers are changing dynamically because this is a fast evolving situation. But, as of last week, it was around 1,500 businesses that had filed for these refunds from the tariffs. And there's a lot of reasons to suggest that number could skyrocket, particularly as we see how lower courts are going to rule.
So investors have, as you've alluded to, they've seen trade policy change rapidly over the past 24 hours. Markets do not like instability. I want to ask you about businesses, though. How does this kind of policy whiplash affect business confidence?
Yeah, so I think I don't want to be too catastrophic here, because if you look at the last year, this is not our first rodeo, right? We've seen this and we've been here before. There's been pretty dramatic swings in trade policy since Trump took office. And so at this point, a lot of, especially larger businesses, they have trade compliance teams. Their supply chain and procurement organizations have buffers in place. They are used to dealing with the administrative task of complying and the cost associated with complying with changing tariffs as they have been changing. The other thing is, and we're not hearing too much about this, but I think you're going to see people start to realize this over the next few weeks. Let's say that it is a 15% across the board, and then it's a wait and see. That's actually a pretty significant decrease over what a lot of the IEPA tariffs were, particularly in a certain number of sensitive metals related categories. And so I think a lot of businesses and a lot of supply chain teams are thinking, hey, we were cost takers when the tariffs got put in place and ratcheted up. And now maybe shoes on the other foot. And it's time to have a conversation about costs going down instead of taking that tariff cost going up.
Some analysts I've been reading are arguing that tariffs have become a longer term feature of U.S. trade policy. What makes this moment different from past tariff disputes, if they are?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's important to note is that people think of these as the Trump tariffs, related to the current administration. And tariffs, especially under IEPA, are a feature of partisan politics. But the Biden administration did not take a lot of the tariffs that were put in by the first Trump administration away. And so I think when you think about this as an enduring feature of US trade policy, tariffs are here to stay. And changes in tariffs, certainly over the next few years, are also here to stay. And so the question is not, I think, how do we adapt to this tariff change or how do we prepare for the next one? It's how do we run a business when costs can change fairly dramatically? Obviously, the push of the administration is say, hey, if you want to avoid the headache, manufacture domestically. The reality is that a lot of large enterprise supply chains are multinational. We've had globalization for multiple decades. And so now the question is, how do we manage risk responsibly in the context of that? And there are a lot of strategies that companies have put in place in their supply chains to deal with that risk.
I can't help but think back to the pandemic. Supply chains, they were restructured during the pandemic, and you could argue that pandemic kind of forced them to think through how to mitigate unforeseen major challenges. How much flexibility do companies really have to adapt to things like this? Are they built harder for stuff like this because of 2020?
That's a great insight, and I'd say that's 100% true. If you think about how supply chains have been run historically over the past few decades, you hear about the model just in time, right? We want to hold as little inventory as possible. We want to carry at the highest level efficiency, which is also the highest level of risk. And we're going to have supply chains that are extremely path dependent. So if there is something that interferes with our single source, we're up a creek without a paddle. And I think what happened since 2020 is companies said, we need to rethink this. We need to have different types of relationships with our suppliers. We need to run our supply chains based on data. We need to shorten the cycle time for decisions. And we need to have a plan B, C, D, et cetera. If you think about after COVID and the China tariffs, people went to a China plus one. Well, that very quickly went to a China plus four and then some. So what you've seen is that companies have dramatically diversified their supply base in many cases. They've also geo-diversified. You hear about nearshoring or right-shoring. And companies have gotten used to holding inventory in different ways and being a little bit more comfortable with the inventory risk associated with hanging on to too much over a longer period of time, as opposed to getting caught short or running out because of a surprise tariff or some other geopolitical or honestly other risk event, black swan event that might occur to disrupt international cross-border trade.
Edmund Zagorin is the founder of supply chain technology company Arkestro. Good to see you. Thanks.
Thanks, Austin.
Have a good one.